Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of Hanging Out with Nolan Hong. And joining us this week on the podcast is a very new friend that I've made. But man, I'm so excited to talk to him because he has got quite the interesting life. And he's been so kind in helping me with my questions about podcasting as I'm trying to, upgrade our podcasting experience for all of you listeners. And the reason why I've been reaching out to him is because he is like one of the OGs of Asian American podcasters. You think that I've been doing my podcast long. He's like got me like beat 2 times as many years. He's like 8+ years. He's got over 600,000 downloads, and he's now partnering with UCLA's AA Studies Center, where they're going to be archiving his episodes for future generations, which is so cool. The name of his podcast is the coolest name because I feel like this shows that he is an OG because he is able to get the name of this podcast, which is Asian America, which is like, whoa. Of course, if you are the OG, you can get that name. After that,
That's
everyone's
right.
just copying you. But it's Asian America, the Fong podcast. And there's tons of other stuff that he's done, and we're going to get into that. But ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Ken Fong. Hey, Dr. Fong.
How's it, Nolan?
Oh man, I knew I was gonna screw all of that up because I was like, when I had gone through your bio, I was like, oh my gosh, there's just so much stuff that you've done in your very accomplished life, and I was like, and I'm such a poor, person as to preparing things, and so that was my biggest concern was like, I'm gonna really butcher Ken's introduction, and then I totally did it. So I guess manifested that, but
See, you projected. You actually
yeah.
kind of lived into your fear, which,
Yeah.
that's pretty common.
Well, how about this? Are there any uh, corrections that you would like to make in how I introduced you and tried to boast of your accolades, which
No, no. In
I feel
fact,
like I fumbled through it.
I mean, back when I was speaking to large gatherings of people, I would always be cringing about what they would say in the introductory
Right.
introductory bio, right? And I feel like sometimes the older you get, the longer your introduction is longer than the allotted time you're given to speak.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is rather annoying. But yeah, I mean, I just I just rather say that I've always been a curious person who's had a huge variety of friends ever since I was a small kid, and it's just kind of led me to very fascinating places. And my podcast, I like telling my listeners that I ended up retiring a little bit earlier than I thought I would because my podcast, I don't know about you, Nolan, but my podcast gave me an experience of this is how I really sound when no one can fire me.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, oddly, mine was a result of because I was let go. Well, I wasn't I left, but I guess theoretically, like I got let go of a place where you know my words would be carefully crafted, I'll say, and so kind of similarly to you,
Yeah.
it was like my podcast was like, oh, this is what freedom feels
Yeah,
like.
exactly. Exactly. I mean, I've been on national boards of nonprofits. I was a pastor for 40 years, and I get it when you represent certain groups, certain
Yeah.
organizations. Uh, even though if you only have three trustee meetings a year, they'll quickly say, "Oh, you can't say that about that issue because you now represent us." So
Yeah.
I get that, but Nolan, you could live and die and never actually say what you really think because
Hmm.
there's always a gun pointed at your temple. And so now in retirement, even though I still got some gas in the tank, I purposely am not interested in joining other boards, in having any sort of titled position with any kind of organization, because the exhilaration that you're experiencing of really getting to talk about and talk with, things that really matter to you, that's a rare commodity. And I'm too selfish now. I don't want to give it up.
Well, do you feel that because this platform allows you to, tap into your true feelings and to your true personality, that it's actually given you more insight to not only like sharing your feelings, but it's helped you learn more about yourself through others and having these real conversations.
Oh yeah, I would definitely say that having had almost 400 guests, um, not all people, especially the majority, I didn't know before.
Mm,
They're authors, they're poets, they're politicians, they're, someone who's fighting against some kind of systemic injustice, that in giving them a safe place to share their journey, share their story, share their heart. I don't have a heart of stone, right? So I don't know if you've experienced that. You have some interest in the guest, but you don't really know them. You don't know what's
right.
really making them tick. And so when you really are earnestly curious about them and you're trying to bring them out in telling their story, it changes you. And I would
Hmm.
say, I care a lot. I just had someone on recently who's a murderer. Right.
Oh, wow.
Okay. I don't know how many murderers you've had on your show.
Uh, not that I know of.
Yeah.
Oh, now you're gonna make me think about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. This guy's a Korean American. He came from Korea when he was 2, and his parents were the typical hardworking, work 3 jobs, never home immigrants. He was a latchkey
Hmm.
only kid. And when they moved to Orange County, this kind of remote part of Orange County, when he was a middle schooler, I mean, there was like no Koreans there. He was getting picked on, he's getting beat up. And
Yeah.
so he joined a Korean gang that had like less than 20 members. But then, they're all trying to posture all the time. And by 16, he ended up murdering somebody to
Oh,
kind of
wow.
prove his worth as the
Yeah.
youngest member of this gang. And he was convicted and at age 18 and sent to 82 years to life in prison.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. Now that's not the kind of person I normally hang out with. Okay. But his people reached out to me because he got his sentence commuted by California's governor. So he got out after 15 years, but the ICE agents were literally waiting outside the prison walls to
Oh
send him
man.
back, if you will, to Korea,
Right.
a place he hadn't been since he was 2. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Because he had a felonious felonious aggravation, uh, which covers a lot of things. You could be cheating on your taxes as an undocumented immigrant, and that gives us ICE the reason to send you back. But he actually was convicted of murdering somebody,
Right.
and so he's really turned his life around all throughout supermax prisons and everything. He never joined an Asian gang. He never acted out in violence, even though he was getting, set upon. And so he's really tried to change his life. He completely regrets having taken another human life.
Hmm.
Uh, but he says, if you send me back to Korea, I'll have to literally start my life over, which if I have to, I have to. But I'm doing so much good now. Like he's got a prison
Mm.
ministry and he's helping recent felons who are coming out of prison just get reestablished so they don't boomerang back to prison. And he feels
Right.
like, I can never bring back the life I took, but I'm trying to do what I can. And so that was fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I could have just kind of listened to that whole tale as like a reporter
Hmm.
and it's like, okay, but it's like, you know what? I have a platform. And if it would help to have you share your story so people can sign a petition to Governor Newsom here in California to issue you a pardon, then I can do that.
And that's what I love about your style. In a lot of ways, we're very similar. But
Yeah.
I think your strength is that you have this genuine, authentic interest in people, and the difference in how that comes across in your podcasts and in your conversations it shows because you're right. It could be easy where you go, oh, here are the highlights. Let's have you just pull out these bullet points and thank you, goodbye. But instead, you want to dive deep into their stories, and it's because you have a genuine interest in it. And I think that's what makes you such a great podcast host, and why your listeners, I'm sure, appreciate the conversations that you have, is because they can attach to, okay, you truly do want to know about this person, not just the story, but the person themselves.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Recently, I've had my ability challenged like 2 levels up. So I have this list, in my mind, I don't write it down anywhere, of my white whales from my podcast. Like for you, it was
Hmm.
like Robert Casimiro. Right?
Yeah,
I listened to that, was like, oh my gosh, he had Robert Casimiro.
yeah.
So I have this list. I've had George Takei on. He was one of my white whales. Well, one of my more recent white whales is comedian Joe Coy, the
Hmm.
Filipino. He's kind of like this generation's Andy Bumatai.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's like, well, how am I ever going to get him? Well, he's come out with a feature film which opens August 5th in theaters nationwide called Easter Sunday, and it's centered on his comedy routine about his family, his Filipino family, which is so hilarious. Um, so I got contacted by this media company that's now talking to me, and they said, "Hey, would you like to interview Joy and one of the other actors, Joe and one of the actors from the movie?" I go, "Are you kidding?" Right? Well, we're having this press junket, which I had never been part of. So basically, they sequester the talent for hours in a space in front of a computer, and one
Hmm.
after the other, different press outlets get to interview them. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so at ease with how I normally do stuff, where I'm doing
Right.
the recording and it's just me and the guest. But now I have a set amount of time, and if I ask the same questions that everybody has asked them 100 times before they get to me,
Hmm.
it's impossible for them not to be checked out.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're so exhausted
Yeah,
by saying the
I
same
wouldn't
thing
I
over,
wouldn't
right?
blame them at all. I wouldn't blame them at
Yeah.
all. So I really had to do more homework than I normally do, because I think my style is much more like yours. As I get a feel for what I want to have happen with the guest, but then let's have a conversation, right? But it's
Right.
like, oh, I don't dare do that. So I really worked at coming up with different angles to get him to talk about the movie, and at the same time from an angle that he hadn't been asked before,
Hmm.
right? And one of my fellow podcasters, she's part of that same Asian American podcast group that you and I met. I mean, she listened to it and she said, she's the one that told me about press junkets, and she goes,
Yeah.
Ken, that is such an arduous thing for the talent, and it was so clear to me that Coy was engaged with you. Like I
Oh,
said,
that's awesome.
man, the fact that you actually were getting, your character was getting pressured to use a Filipino accent, and that your manager was not a white guy, it was a South Asian American guy. I love that that wasn't the typecast stereotype. And he goes, "You saw that? You noticed that?" Right? So I mean, those little kind of things, I feel like, okay, it's a new challenge to do all the stuff you're saying I do, but
Hmm.
in this other setting, this junket setting, where everything is set up for you to bore them to death, right? It just, it takes that extra effort. I do feel my 8 years plus of experience just doing this
Hmm.
helped me instinctively prepare so that we did still make a connection.
Yeah. Do you think with that experience, as cool as it was that, you got far more exposure because of this, that it really cemented your love and passion for the style in which you are
Oh
able
yeah.
to do your podcast?
Yeah, yeah, and I would, I'm probably incredibly delusional right now, but I want to believe that as I'm given more opportunities to connect to these movie people, right, and all this stuff,
Hmm.
that I will continue to bring my unique brand myself. I don't know this for a fact, Nolan, but I told my wife, I think of all the interviews that Joe did that day, and who knows how many he did, I think he's really going to remember talking to me.
Hmm.
I don't, I can't prove that. Don't put any money on it. But just, if you listen to that episode, you hear the back and forth, and how he got so excited, so passionate about certain things that I laid out for him, right? And listen to my stories, which I'm not
Hmm.
sure you're supposed to do, right? But it's just like, hey, it's my show, right? So I'm promoting your movie for free, but I still want to bring some of the elements that make my show, right?
Right.
So yeah. So anyway, I like to think that going forward, yes, it reinforces the freedom that I have, and in your setting you have, to approach these interviews the way we do. But I think I'm old enough and wise enough now, and maybe just stubborn enough, that I'm not going to completely change my approach, because that's typically not how you do it in this setting.
Right. And I would like to believe that in this experience that Joe will not only remember you but seek you out for the next time, because it's like, hey, I really enjoyed that time. And that the best would be, he goes, hey, let's do our interview outside of this junket thing,
Oh
and let's
yeah.
just have
Oh,
one.
you're
So
reading my
that's why I'm
mind.
putting it out there. I'm putting
Yeah,
it out there for
yeah,
you.
yeah. You're reading my mind. I got bumped up to first class coming back from Hawaii with my family, and I was sitting next to Ali Wong right after
Oh,
she
cool.
did her show in Honolulu, right?
Yeah.
And so that was just, so I was like, I had to work up the courage to talk to her, right? Because she's like sitting right across the aisle from me. She belongs in first class. I
Yeah.
don't. And she was reading a book, but she was nice enough. We had a nice talk, right? But first thing she says is, I don't do podcasts.
Oh.
Okay. So it's just like, why am I even talking to you?
Well, hopefully one day she'll change her mind and remember that conversation. Like, I trust that guy, Ken.
Yeah,
Let's go on his podcast.
yeah. Send that message out to the universe for me, Nolan.
I just did. No, I'm just
Okay,
kidding.
thank you. I appreciate it. The universe does listen to your show. I forgot
That they are one of two that listen to my show.
that.
So where did you come? So being that you started yours over 8 years ago, I mean, it wasn't that especially for Asian Americans, that podcasting was much of a thing. Where did you get the idea to do it, and why was it something that you wanted to start up?
At the time, so this is early 2015, I had been working for about 5 years prior to that with someone who went to my church who was a documentary filmmaker.
Hmm.
His first documentary film eventually won a bunch of awards at Asian Pacific Film Festivals, got picked up by PBS. And he and I were working on a documentary that will now never be made. But it was
Oh.
about my journey, because for a lot of different reasons, but it was my journey as the pastor of a historically Asian American, Japanese American church to make them fully open and welcoming of LGBTQ people. And so he goes like, I can't sit there in the pew and watch you leave this, because this is not an easy journey without filming it, And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay,
Yeah.
so we had all this footage and we'd raised a bunch of money, but then it's the grind of trying to find the story in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we hadn't produced anything for about 2 years. And he comes to me and he goes, hey, so while we're still waiting to see if we can make a movie, I've got an idea. Why don't we together do a podcast for Asian Americans? And I said, his name is Christopher Wong. I go, Christopher, to be honest with you, I don't listen to podcasts. I think I know what they are, but why would you even suggest that? Okay. And he said, well, a couple of reasons. One, I think the podcast world is just starting to open up. And looking back, 2015 was declared the year of the podcast.
Mm.
So that's
Yeah.
interesting timing. He goes, two, I don't see right now in 2015 that many Asian American focused podcasts. Now there's hundreds and hundreds. Yeah. Okay. So
The
he
Asians
said,
like, oh, you can listen to us? Oh,
yeah,
that's all good.
yeah. We're doing this. We got tech.
Yeah.
So anyway, he said, I think you already have some notoriety. You already have some national presence in various ways. So you wouldn't be starting from scratch. At least, there's some people that have shown up to hear you talk about something. And he says, and, even though this wouldn't necessarily have to be a Christian podcast, when it was appropriate, because of the guest and how they wanted to interact, there could be a light, as he called it, a light dusting of spirituality, which again, I think is kind of an unusual thing for what I see out there, let alone with an Asian American. So right. I go, okay, so you're going to handle all the tech stuff and I'll just be the host, right? And you do the editing and the uploading and all. He goes, oh yeah. So that's how we started. And eventually it turned out that I got all the guests, which is fine. I'm a people, networky person. And, I think for the first 2 years, he would drive from the west side of Los Angeles to where I was recording in Pasadena to sit there and direct me while, he's listening too. And he'd write me, like, ask him about this, and then after a while, that drive was just too much. And and so he's like, here, I'll loan you the digital recorder. This is how you have to press the button. and then give me the files. And I'm like, so then we did that separate. And then after 5 years, he really needed to get back to what he wants to do, which is documentary filmmaking.
Right.
So he bowed out, and I had someone step in from Austin, Texas, who was a listener, who's a video editor and all that stuff. And she said, oh, I'll do it for free. Right. So she did it for free. And then she moved here during the pandemic to LA. And then with a week's notice, she said, I just got a job, which eventually I found out was Sony Pictures. Oh. And it's like, I don't have any time to do this anymore. Yeah. So I'll come over to your house, and in an hour, I'll walk you through GarageBand, which you have already on your Mac. And I'll show you how to do it and how to upload everything. And so I look back on some of those cringeworthy episodes, those first 3 months when it was me all by myself. And so there was quite a learning curve, but I would say that I thoroughly enjoy the editing process now.
Oh,
in fact, I think I'm pickier than they were.
Well, I can understand that.
Right? Right. Because
you're going to be the harshest critic of your own stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how it all got started. And as I tell new podcasters, which you are not, or would-be podcasters, I would say if you aren't prepared to be consistently uploading content, then you're not really going to be a podcaster. Because I know how it is when my favorite podcasts, for some reason, they have seasons, so it's just like, wow, that just means you don't want to do it every week, But I know that, you can't do that. And I feel like the other interesting thing is my friend Christopher, he got me to do my little intros where I'm sharing some personal narrative, some personal thought. And over the years, the feedback I've gotten is there are people that actually can't connect to my guest that episode. Because let's say the listener is in their 60s like me, and they go, you had this young Asian rapper on there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just checked out. But they always say, but I never fail to listen to your intro. I go, why? He's like, because you're always thinking about what's going on in the world and in your life. And even though in the beginning, I may not know where you're going with it, I know you're going to land it somewhere. And so I'm willing to wait, and I think to myself, Nolan, well, that's a sermon illustration without the sermon.
Yeah.
So that's been fun, but it's also a challenge, to keep coming up with what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah.
And, just, you know what this is like. You just pay attention.
Yeah. Well, what do you find that because you've had that kind of outlet that it's almost been just as much therapeutic for you as it is for your listeners to, connect and feel, heard through your, anecdotes or your experiences?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think because I came from 4 decades of being in a pulpit, and maybe 3 Sundays out of 4, I'm up there and I have an opportunity. This is before everything goes online with the pandemic and everything, but I had a regular opportunity to reflect about my life, to reflect about life, to share anecdotes. And I think if I didn't have this now internet platform, and I didn't have that segment up front before I bring my guest on, I could well imagine that I would feel frustrated.
Yeah.
Because I'm a storyteller.
And does your wife, I'm sure she's like at this point heard them all. And
oh, yeah.
Like, please, honey, no more stories.
Well, no, I would think some of the stories that I'm sharing on my, she doesn't, I don't know about your wife. My wife doesn't listen to my podcast. She listens to all these other podcasts, but you don't listen to mine.
We live very parallel lives there.
I'm telling you. So, so my, perfect revenge is to tell stories about her on my podcast knowing she's not going to listen. No, I mean, I still operate with the same principle that I had 40 years in the pulpit, where if I do talk about my wife or our daughter, I never make them look bad. I mean, they always look good. And if anyone looks like a jerk or a fool, it's me. Okay. So, there's that. And I think because my stories tend to be very current, and based on my stream of consciousness at the time, whatever's going on, my wife doesn't necessarily tune into that unless we're talking over lunch or something. Right.
Yeah.
So but I think it was more in the past when I was in the pulpit, and, when you're in the same church for 40 years, you're bound to repeat yourself.
Yeah,
Okay. But there's
of
some
course.
choice, right? There's some choice stories
Yeah,
that, and it's just like, and some of these people, maybe half the room has never heard it. And so,
exactly.
so at first it used to really make me uh, very anxious. Like, oh,
Hmm.
these people have been here the whole 40 years. They're like, oh, it's
Yeah,
that one again. Versus it's like you're, going to hear a Motown group and they're playing their
yeah,
greatest hits.
exactly.
Right. And so I would then preface about to share that story again and saying, I'm sure some of you have heard this before, but because some of you haven't, and because I think it's just too appropriate to what we're going to talk about here, I'm going to use my license and say it again. So I would at least acknowledge that, right?
Yeah. And I think that's only fair because what I think irritates people is when you present it as if it's brand new and they're like, "Oh, this guy has nothing new." But if it's
Right.
like, "Hey, I know this isn't new," but and they're like, "Oh, okay. You're forgiven. Go ahead. I love this story actually.
Yeah,
Keep it
right,
going."
right,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Tell you, one of my pet peeves during my years as a pastor was hearing other pastors tell like funny stories as if it really happened to them, but I
uh
read it the week before in a magazine.
yes. I've been to sermons like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, and one time I knew this guy well enough, I can kind of gently confronted him
Yeah.
afterwards. And I go, I'm curious why you said that actually happened to you when we both know it came out of this pulpit magazine that's full of
Uh-huh.
stories. And he kind of smirked like he just got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And he's like, I just like telling it that way. And, and I feel like, okay, that's got to be a form of plagiarism.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, so what does that tell me if you're not bothered by doing
Yeah.
plagiarism, right? Right. And plus, I hate canned jokes anyway. And I'm much more of a Seinfeld sort of comic, and
Mhm.
life is full of observations that are hilarious.
Right. You can find the humor in so many things
Yeah.
instead of just having this crafted thing that ah
It's too
well
canned.
when you so you were having difficulty jumping on board at first when Chris presented you with this podcast. What was it about it where you felt like, okay, this is something that I'm willing to, put my energy and heart into? And has that kind of been stayed the same, or has it evolved as far as your motivation or what you want out of
Well,
doing the
yeah, I'll
podcast?
answer your question in reverse order. I would definitely say it's evolved to where my passion is greater. I
Mm.
mean, I can go back, and I'm sure we can all do this. When you think about small kid time, so married to a comma, I know I'll use some of your vernacular. When you think
I was
about
like,
small kid
whoa.
time, right? When small kid time,
Yeah, yeah.
we're all kind of the same the way we were back then as we are now. So back then, I was never athletic. I was never the tallest, right? But I had a sense of humor, and I made a point of making friends across a wide band of different kinds of people. Okay.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I think one of my motivations, not the only one, was because I just found everyone kind of fascinating.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now I look back to, then I look at my 4 decades of being a pastor, and that was certainly something that could have been very constrained, but I expanded even that enclave. So we started with a historically Japanese American church, and then I helped navigate it when Chinese young adults started showing up uninvited. This is a classic thing, Nolan, because you know what NDO is, right? So
No.
Japanese. Oh, you know what NDO? Okay, so Japanese have this very polite way of saying no to something they want
Okay.
because you don't want to seem obvious.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so
they'll reject it a couple
yeah, yeah,
times. Okay.
right. And so the joke is that Chinese have one less NDO than Japanese people. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's when you get Chinese and Japanese together, the Japanese are assuming that us Pake have the same amount of NDO, but we
Mm-hmm.
give in one too soon.
Yeah.
Okay. So all these Chinese young adults started being dissatisfied with their bilingual Chinese churches. And our church had a sansei, older sansei, senior pastor, was a quarterback in his high school. I mean, nothing like the Chinese pastor at their church. And then I was on staff who was in my young 20s. So even though the Japanese church never said, you know what, it'd be fantastic if we can get some Chinese people coming here. Like they never said that. The Chinese came because you didn't say we couldn't come. Okay.
Yeah.
so, so the Japanese have this phrase "shikateganai," which is, well, what are we gonna do? It can't be helped. So
Yeah.
they're like, okay, did you invite these Chinese people? No. Did you? No. Well, what are we gonna do? It can't be helped. So in come the Chinese people. So I helped kind of navigate that transition. One of the funniest examples of this difference in Yo is when Chinese and Japanese go out to a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Japanese, I learned this from my wife and from all the Japanese people in my old church. So Japanese are deathly afraid of not anticipating correctly everybody's needs.
Okay.
Right? Because they're not going to tell you that they're hungry or that they're still hungry. So you have to make sure that there's more than enough food. Okay.
Yeah.
So, here's all this food and, we're getting down to the end of the meal and there's stuff left on the plates. Okay. So you, as a Chinese person, I'll say to Nolan, you're not Jap. I'll say to a Japanese person, oh, would you like the last drumstick? And even if they want the last drumstick, they're going to say, oh, no, thank you. You have it. Right. Yeah. And I'm supposed to say, oh, no, I've had enough. Because if all the plates are empty in a Japanese mind, how do you know someone's not still hungry?
Right.
So stuff got to be left on the plates. In the Chinese mind, if you paid for it, why are you leaving it there?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's just like, right. So one of two things typically happen. So the Japanese person's like, oh, no. So all the Japanese around the table turn down what's remaining.
Yeah.
The Chinese either do one of two things. Either they help themselves to what's there because they'll say no once and then they'll take it. Okay.
Yeah.
Or they put it in a takeout little carton and take it home with them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the final difference happens where they fight over the bill, which is classic. Okay. So remember, Chinese have one less. Right? So the Japanese keep insisting, let me pay. And then Chinese go, okay, you pay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right? And so I was seeing this lived out in real time where people in our church were like the Japanese are going home grumbling under their breath.
Yeah.
That the damn Chinese took all the leftovers or they finished everything on the plate and then the Japanese most of the time end up paying for the bill.
Yeah.
Right. And the Chinese are like, wow, the Japanese are so generous.
And the Japanese opinion of the Chinese, not so complimentary.
No. Damn pake. Right.
But your last name is Fong. So you're Chinese?
Yes.
But you were a Chinese pastor in the Japanese church.
Right.
So how did that work out where were you like the one token Chinese person there?
Well, so timing is everything in life, right? So when I went to this church, when I moved south to finish up graduate school, I knew some of the people there because they're all part of the same American Baptist denomination. So even though I was in Northern California, we'd have these American Baptist Asian pastor gatherings and convocations. And so I knew some of the people already at this church. So just based on familiarity of denomination and having some connection, I'm a new kid in Southern California. I started going to the church and then I got an internship because I had one required for my schooling. But at that time, there still wasn't a lot of Chinese people coming to the church. Some people had intermarried with Chinese, but for the most part, it was still a Japanese church. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then that influx of young adults from Chinese churches started happening, uninvited, unannounced. And after a while, it became quite significant of size. And so I was starting to work on my doctorate, which was how do you grow an Asian American church? And so I was able to have a conversation with the Japanese American staff and deacons. I said, I'm sure you've noticed that the number of Chinese Americans like myself is quite sizable now, right? They're all young adults. They're not older people. And they go, yeah. I go, well, just so you know, this feels like a Japanese church that's nice to Chinese people. Okay. And they go, well, what does that mean? I said, so you've certainly welcomed us, but you've done nothing both in staffing and in language, vocabulary, and expanding the culture to actually say we're now an Asian American, Chinese, and Japanese church. So I know more Japanese terminology than Chinese terminology. Okay.
Yeah.
I can say shikate ganai. I could say, oyasumi nasai. I can, all these kind of things. And I know all about the relocation camps now, because when I do the Nisei funerals, even though my family's Chinese, we never went to the camp. I've had to learn the names of all the camps and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not complaining. I'm saying I grafted into your stream. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you are serious that God is up to something here and something new is trying to birth, then I think we need to be intentional about some aspects of it. Okay. Otherwise, it's still going to feel like a Japanese church that's nice to Chinese people. And you can use that descriptor, with anything. It's like, it's a Haole church that's nice to, non-Haole people. And, they're just happy because you don't make them change anything.
Yeah.
And they're just trying to make room for you. But there's always a part of you that's co-opted, like you're not fully yourself. Okay. So to their credit, they really took this to heart. And so they go, you know what? By then they hadn't hired me yet as the associate pastor, but they go, you know what? We're going to take out an ad in the Chinese newspaper every New Year's, just like we do in the Japanese newspaper, to give greetings. Right. And I go, you know what? A for effort. F for outcome. I said the Chinese like me that come in church, we can't read Chinese.
Yeah.
We use those papers to wrap fish in, right?
Yeah.
It's just like this is going to be completely missed by us. So they go, so what are we talking about? I said, at the risk of sounding self-serving, I think the next hire, if you're ready to hire a full-time associate pastor, even though there might be qualified Japanese Americans out there, you should probably really think about hiring a Chinese American. Okay. And that they totally agreed. So it just so happened that I was graduating. And so I was one of the candidates, and I'm the known entity. So I got picked and I stayed for 40 years. So
wow.
that's how that happened. And so that experience, helped me say that you can't just do everything organically. You can't just let everything naturally happen. You have to see where it needs to go to send the right message. And then you need to be determined to make those decisions.
So was this, going into the church and a career in
Are you
serving.
frozen, Nolan?
I'm here. Are you? Oh,
let's start that over. You were frozen there for about a minute.
Oh no. It says my internet connection is unstable. I thought they were talking about my mindset.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So for about a minute, you were frozen.
Oh wow. Well, that just goes on par with the way my day's gone. We've been, and as you can see, like my camera's glitching every 10 seconds. We've been having so many tech issues here today with other things that we're working on. So I don't know. I think it's just one of those times in the Earth's axis where technology right here in this spot is not working. But I was asking if this career and life in ministry was something that you had known for early on, like in your childhood. Was that something that sparked this path for you, or how did you find your way to the church?
Not at all. Our church, First Chinese Baptist Church in Sacramento, just to give you an idea, it was started when Abraham Lincoln was president.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So it's a few years ago. Yeah.
It's an old work. It's, I think, the second oldest Baptist work among Chinese west of the Mississippi. So yeah, I went there. My parents went there. My aunts and uncles went there. But we kind of had a dual mindset. So on the one hand, we loved going to church and we liked everything that was affiliated with it. But on the other hand, at home, we would say, well, the only people that become pastors are people who couldn't do anything else. Okay. So yes. They're not the sharpest knife in the drawer. So since we were pretty sharp, my mom was raising myself as her oldest son. I had an older sister and my two younger brothers. She was basically raising us sons to be president of the United States.
Right.
I mean, she literally said that. And so like, that's why you don't have to go to Chinese school on Saturday, because nobody with an accent, especially Canto accent, is going to get elected to the United States. So I was pre-med, pre-dental, pre-orthodontia, all that kind of stuff, while I was still very active in the church and secretly harboring this judgment over whoever was our pastor. Like, yeah, it's nice you found this job. This, this kind of an easy gig, but if you're really worth anything, you're going to do something else. And so that pretty much took me all the way through college.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Now I applied to dental school my junior year just to see what that was like. In the back of my mind, Nolan, I'm thinking, I wonder if this is a bad career choice, because I do have memories trying to build models of airplanes when I was a little kid. And how many wheel struts did I break? Okay. And I think I'm going to work inside someone's mouth, right? That kind of manual dexterity. But I put that out of my mind. And, I applied. I didn't get accepted, which I wasn't surprised. But it showed me enough that this was just the wrong landing zone for me.
Right.
So, now I'm approaching my senior year at Cal Berkeley, biology major, and I'm not pre-med anymore. I'm not pre-dental, which, by the way, is great when you're dating an Asian woman. It just really impresses her parents. You haven't darkened the doors of a med school or dental school yet, but it's like, he's pre-med. Oh, welcome.
Yeah.
Right.
So much potential.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So then I was really panicking, and I said, okay, I've got to obviously find something that will take my biology degree, and I would like it to have something to do with the health field, have some kind of a status attached, maybe not as much as the doctor. And so I looked in the School of Public Health catalog, and there was hospital administrator masters, okay, an MPH. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Do I know what that is? No. Okay. So I threw out some applications right away. This is getting to the last semester at Cal. Cal's School of Public Health said, nope. Okay. I applied to UH. Nope. Okay. But University of Washington said, we're intrigued. We'd like to interview you, but you know what? You're getting awfully close to Cal's finals week. And so rather than jeopardize your, grades, we'll actually ask Cal School of Public Health to do the interview for us and then send us the results. Okay. Now, dumb me. I'm like, okay, that's convenient. So I show up, I sit down with this Cal guy, and he opens up my jacket and he goes, oh, I've seen this application before.
Oh, no.
I was on the committee here that rejected you. Okay. No, I don't know if you're old enough to remember the Flintstones cartoon, but sometimes Fred would shrink to the size of a thimble, right? And I felt like literally that happened to me. I just shrunk until I was like almost invisible. And then I'll never forget what he said. He goes, so are you at all curious why we here at Cal School of Public Health, why we rejected you? And I'm a glutton for punishment. So I'm like, oh, by all means, tell me. Yeah, lay it on me. And this is like seared into my gray matter. He said, we looked at your application and we said, young, relatively intelligent. Now, understand that
Wow.
qualifier, relatively, and naive as all hell.
Wow.
Okay.
How could they get that from your application?
But it was absolutely spot on. Okay. And so for the next half an hour of an hour interview, he's grilling me about what do I understand about the field of hospital administration. Okay. And I know nothing.
Yeah.
Okay. So
just look good.
in my mind, I am like scouring, like, what did I see in Newsweek? What did I, and I'm just trying to give some kind of answer. And then the second half, he starts telling me why he's not going to recommend to University of Washington that I should get in. Okay. And he says, now, if they take our advice and you don't get in, I would highly recommend that you take the next year and volunteer in a hospital and see if you can shadow an actual hospital administrator, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And I said, you know what? Even if they accept me, I'm not going to go.
Wow.
Okay. And he was like, what? Why would you say that? I said, because I just realized you've done me a huge favor here. Like, I've avoided taking business classes like the plague because I don't like administration. Yeah. Okay. That's why I was a biology major. right? I could look at nature and animals and, all this kind of stuff. And so the now that I understand what's really involved in running a hospital, even if it's proximal to being a medical doctor, it's just like that would be the worst possible outcome for me. So I guess I have to thank you, right? And he's like, "Nah, I think I was too hard on you." And and I'm like, "Well, not that you say that now, but I said no. Again, I stand by whatever your decision, your recommendation. I'm not going." And then I remember walking out of that dark public health building on the north side of Cal's campus, have to walk all the way back to my apartment with my 3 senior roommates, all have had multiple interviews for their fields. And I've got my one interview result, right? And I'm thinking, what do I tell them, right?
Yeah.
And then, I mean, this sounds stupid now, but I mean, ever since junior high, I was voted most likely to be a doctor, most likely to succeed. And our high school class of 72, like we have reunions every 5 years. So our first reunion was coming up in a couple of years. And I'm thinking I was all set to brag about being this or that, right?
Yeah.
And now for the first time in my life, I don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up. What do I do? Okay, now, interestingly enough, in 2 weeks is my 50th high school reunion. So
wow.
It's been that long, okay? And I just remember feeling like, you know what? I'm done pretending like I know what I want to do, what I'm supposed to do. So I'm just going to graduate with my degree and I'm going to home and face the music. So the music was my father. Okay.
Oh.
And so my father's a child of the Depression. Like I'm his oldest son. So, I rotate back home and he's like, just out of curiosity, what degree did I pay for you to have? And I'm like, biology. So when are you going to be biologizing? he turned it into a participle. And I'm like, oh, well, see, that was just to fulfill prerequisites when I was pre-dental and pre-med. But now that I don't want to do that, I'm not planning to do anything with that. And he goes, no, that's not an option.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I went on a couple stupid job posting things at the local hospital, even to be a reception in the mental health clinic. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And in the meantime, a part-time job opened up back at First Chinese Baptist Church, my church, because they needed someone to do the youth. And I was like, I play guitar. I led Bible studies in college. I'm pretty good at that. So I'll just do that to kind of fill my time in the summer. And lo and behold, in partnership with this young mother that was like this earth mother to all the kids, the youth group exploded.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And so I'm now dealing with kids coming from these 2 local high schools. They're actually changing the night that the student government meets at this one high school because it's the same night as our youth group meeting. And the kids are coming to our group instead of the student government meeting. Right. Yeah. And so, it's crazy. But still I'm going, but this is just my summer gig. Like, right. I'm too sharp. Maybe I'm not, to be a pastor. And that's
you're remotely intelligent.
Relatively.
Relatively intelligent.
Yeah. So anyway, all of that is to say, the pastor of our church at the time, they were having their annual Asian pastors little conference in Southern California. So he says, hey, we want to pay your way to come join us. And I remember telling him, like, why? This is my summer gig. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but certainly not that. And he goes, that's okay. Just come anyway. And it was during that weekend with all these pastors where their congregation wasn't there. And you can, once they got past the corny jokes, you could really, they let their hair down and you can hear both the joy, but also the suffering. And, so it wasn't all like bright eyes but there was something about the depth of their lives that all of a sudden I was seeing as something attractive. Oh. And so that weekend, as we were closing off, I stood up unannounced and I go, I don't know what constitutes a call, but I was really focused on material wealth, but there's a richness here that is beyond what I was imagining for myself. And if God would have me, even though I can't speak Chinese, I want to do this. And so that's how it all started. And then, Chinese pastors kept pressuring me for the next 10 years to learn how to speak Chinese.
Did you ever?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
You
right.
stuck to your
tough.
guns.
Yeah, but it was tough. It was tough because these are people that I respect. And in our culture, like you have to respect the
Of
people who love
course.
you, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, Ken, how can you minister it right? And so finally, after 5 years of that, I pushed back and I go, look, you were literally born in San Francisco, Chinatown. Okay. I was born in Sacramento in the suburbs. So you eat dim sum like multiple times a week. I eat it like 5 times a year.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't learn how to use chopsticks until I was in high school. So there's nothing wrong with me though. Like, but there are people that I know that will come to something that I head up that will never go to Chinatown to something that you head up. And that's not putting you down and me up. It's just saying it's different.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when I got down here to Southern California, the godfather of Chinese churches, like he spoke at this conference and I was so disappointed with his message. Like he was kowtowing to all the overseas born people, even though he was talking about new paradigms, everything. So he was pastoring a First Chinese in Honolulu at the time. So I go over there to meet with my future in-laws. And so upstart that I am, I make an appointment to meet with this guy, right? So I go, hey, Dr. Wong, did you read my 3-page critique of your conference? They only gave you half page.
Oh, wow.
I wrote 3 pages, okay? And, he says, yeah, I did. I said, well, do you understand my disappointment and my frustration? And then he looks me square in the eye and he says, Ken, you're 30 years ahead of your time. I'll never forget that. Another one of those unforgettable conversations, okay?
Yeah.
Except this time I didn't shrink in my seat. I said, what do you mean by 30 years ahead of my time? He goes, the Chinese church is kind of like the mafia. The overseas people really own and run the Chinese church. And those of us who are ABCs, American born, if we want to get a toehold in it, then we got to play by their rules until finally we have gray hair or no hair and we have a chance to do our thing. So you're just 30 years too soon. So bide your time. Don't have any facial hair because only bad guys in Chinese movies have facial hair, by the way. Okay.
And some of us can't make facial hair.
I know.
So.
Yeah. And it's like, if you end up not marrying this Sansei from Hawaii, then I would go to Hong Kong and pray for a bilingual wife. Right. I mean, all these kind of things. And so I look back at him. I'm probably 24 years old at this time. Okay. He's in his 50s. I said, 30 years too soon. I said, who says you're right and I'm wrong? I think you're 30 years too late. I think I'm right on time. Okay. And he goes, what? And he says, you don't understand. I said, no, here's what I understand. If the current game locks me out and makes me like twiddle my thumbs for the next 30 years, then I'm going to start at this very moment. I'm going to start my own game where you could be 24, only speak English, get the wrong food when you order sometimes in Chinese. Okay. And really are an awkward user of chopsticks. And you get to play right now. And he looks at me, Nolan, and he goes, I just explained to you, there's already a game afoot. And here's the rules. You don't get to start your own game. I go, no, in my game, you get to start your own game. Right? He goes, well, they will never bless your game. I said, well, in my game, I don't need their blessing. I'm making it up as I'm talking, right? But I think there was an essential truth to that. And I said, you know what? If you turn out to be right and I turn out to be wrong, then I'm going to fall flat on my face. But I'd rather fall flat on my face in that direction than to pretend like I fit in the current game. Yeah. Okay.
When you know you don't.
No, and I don't. And so I lived that out as best I could. 29 years after he told me that, I saw him in a dim sum restaurant in Arcadia, California. Okay. Now he's in his 80s in failing health. So I go over and I go, hey, Dr. Wong, what's going on? Right. You know what he says? I've been watching you, Ken. Okay. And you have stuck to your guns. I have to give you credit. Okay. So good for you. Okay. Now, I think, man, that dude had to eat a lot of crow. Yeah. And I look back now, Nolan, and I said, I think he had the best of intentions for me. Right. But he couldn't imagine what I was talking about. So he just kept putting what the status quo was in front of me. Well, now I'm older now than he was when he first met with me. And I have young bucks coming to talk to me. Yeah. Bucks and does. And I don't want to be that guy.
I was gonna ask
Right.
if you're the one saying,
No,
this is how you do it.
no, this is not. The guy's like, well, so I want to be a rapper and I want to
Yeah.
do ministry. And I'm like, tell me more.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'll bring you on my podcast.
Yeah.
How can I open some doors for you? I still have some keys to some doors, right? So what I've learned that you can only learn as time goes on is that it doesn't automatically happen where you just get rigid,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think you still need to be paying attention. You still need to be curious. You still need to believe that the best is yet to come.
Mm-hmm.
And, I talked to some of my grad students. They're like, you have more energy than me. I'm like, because you've already given up.
Yeah.
It's just like, stop that.
How did your parents take to this news? Because after hearing you tell that your mom was expecting you to be president, that your dad
Yeah.
wanted you to biologize, and then you go down this path of serving the ministry, it's very different from
Oh, yeah.
president and
Yeah.
biology
A
person,
notch or
right?
two below that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And they thought that pastors couldn't do anything. And
Right,
this was just
right.
right.
so it's interesting because my mom had secretly, personally, such a low opinion of her pastors, but she had such a high opinion of me, her oldest son.
Ah,
She actually was my biggest cheerleader. When
That's
other
awesome.
Asian parents, other Chinese parents, even in the church would go, gee, Emily, aren't
Yeah.
you disappointed? He
what
had so much
happened?
potential. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And she would say, oh, if someone as gifted as my son feels God has called him to do this, then that's good for the church.
No, wow.
Okay. So that's rare. Okay. That's rare.
Yes.
My dad, on the other hand, my dad didn't become a Christian until his 60s. And so, in fairness to, his worldview, he's just like shaking his head.
Yeah.
And so I remember my pastor at the time who brought me down to that conference, like his dad was the first self-made millionaire in San Francisco Chinatown through insurance. So he, as many Chinese parents, you work really hard, you build this empire if you can, and then you want to hand it off to a family member.
Yeah.
So he was all set to hand his insurance business off to his only son. And knowing his only son as my pastor, he would have destroyed it. It's just not him. He'd be a better
Yeah.
social worker. Okay. But so when his son decided to go into the ministry, his dad was so upset because this screwed up the whole succession planning.
Right.
So he had to find a first cousin, which I'm sure wasn't too hard.
Yeah.
Hey, how would you like to act? Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And so when I went to him for advice, like, I think I'm supposed to go to seminary. He said, unless your father gives you his full blessing, then I don't think you can go.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And I'm like, then I guess I'm not going because A, my dad's not a Christian, and B, that's just not how he thinks. He's not going to
Yeah.
bless this. So I had to figure this out once again on my own. I went to older people and they told me the old stuff. So I decided rather than give my dad too much power, I want to show him respect, but not give him power over me. So I said, hey, Dad, I'd like your opinion. Okay. I didn't ask for permission. I'm thinking about going to seminary. What do you think? I think that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Like, how are you going to pay for this? You don't have any money. I go, that's my problem. No, I mean, how are you going to pay for it? I go, that's not a problem. I'm the oldest. You've got two, more sons to pay through college. Let me figure it out. Okay. And I feel like in retrospect, my not trying to play both sides, like, Dad, I want your blessing, but I also want, even if you're against it, I want you to pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come on, that's weak sauce, right?
Yeah.
So I said, Dad, if I'm now going to make a decision as a man, then I'm going to assume the mantle of manhood. And whether I have to take out loans or whatever, that's on me. That's not on you. And I think, years later, I mean, he really came around. I mean, before he died, there was so much healing in our relationship. But he was able to say he was proud of me.
Oh, wow.
Right.
That is like the holy grail of compliments from an Asian parent, right?
Oh my gosh, especially your dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's initially my dad's reaction, but I felt, and I passed that lesson on to younger people, following later. because I had this one guy come. I was on the board of trustee of this national Christian organization, and we're meeting in Boston. So there's all these Harvard students assembled in this other trustee's home. This one guy comes to me. He's at MIT, and he's like, so I feel like my dad, I feel like God wants me to be a pastor, but I'm a double E major at MIT, and my dad's not a Christian. And I just told him, I'm a year from graduating, but I feel like I'm supposed to be pastor. And my goes, okay, look. So now you're talking like a white son, okay? Not like a Chinese son. So I'm gonna treat you like a white father. So you can do whatever you want when you pay for the rest of your MIT education, because you haven't had to work a day in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, Dr. Fong, I can't pay for that. And I'm like, dude, like, look at this from your dad's perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like you went off to MIT, very prestigious. Then you joined this Christian group on campus. And in his mind, you joined a cult.
Yeah.
Okay. You joined a cult, and you're actually disobeying, disrespecting your parents, and you want to do this thing and throw away your whole MIT education. It's like, if you ever hope to see your dad become a Christian, why would he ever want to join the group that did this to his son?
It ruined his life. Yeah.
Totally. Right. So he goes, so what do you suggest? And then I was kind of riffing off what I did. And I said, look, you got a year left, and you're going to have a double E major from MIT. Rotate back home, go live at home, save some money. You're going to get a good paying job. Maybe you're going to get high level security clearance and go into some black rooms, right? But I said, you'll still be a Christian wherever you go. So God's not limited by degrees or titles. And I said, save up your money because you're living at home. Pay your dad back for your MIT education. Show him that you're a responsible adult. And then if you really still feel like you're supposed to be a pastor, then you can go to seminary. Okay. Mm-hmm. And, it's funny because I had white friends listening in on my counsel this, and they go, we would have never thought to tell him that. Because it's all about individual freedom.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, well, sorry, Dad, you don't understand God's will for my life. And so too bad. I'm going to go do whatever I want. And thanks for paying for my MIT education. And it's like, wow, that's so that's when I really began to go deeper and deeper into understanding the confluence of Asian American culture and faith, and say, you can't just get everything from Howleys, or, it's like, they don't live in our skin. They don't understand the nuances of our family dynamics.
Yeah. The rich history that it goes back to that has created that dynamic, right?
Yeah.
It's not something so easy to just drop. I'm curious, what did this young
guy?
person follow?
I don't know.
No.
I never tracked him. It would be interesting. I don't know what he did. I mean, he seemed to be
so curious.
Yeah, he seemed to be very chastened, and he's a bright guy, so I'm sure he was mulling it over. And it's just like, yeah, you don't know that God's really called you to ministry. A calling is a subjective thing. It's not an objective thing. Like, I went to school with a lot of people that felt the same way you did. Now they're selling insurance. Okay. And they're still paying off their loan. That's not a bad thing, but it's like, it's not as open and shut as you think.
Yeah. I'm so curious because I grew up in a strict Christian home, and my mom is like extremely, like, probably as extreme devoted to, the church and stuff. And I kind of grew away from that. And I have my own, thoughts on that. I'm not against it or anything, but I kind of like, I feel like I attach to you where it's like, oh, this is the way it's traditionally done. I understand, but here's what makes more sense to me, for me and stuff. So what really stood out to me was when I learned through your bio about how, and you'd mentioned this earlier about how that you'd kind of bridge that gap between your church and the LGBTQ plus community, which is fascinating to me because I feel like, especially for a lot of these really, big churches, like, that's a huge divide. And so I was curious how that came about and what you did, and were you always open to this kind of bridging, or was there something that changed that brought you to this realization?
Yeah, very much the latter. So I grew up was straight privilege, even though I didn't know what that was. And even at our little First Chinese Baptist church, there were several people, especially guys, a little bit younger than me, that I thought were gay. We'd whisper about it when they were, in earshot.
Right.
But it was very condemning, very judgmental,
Right.
very much the belief that, as I'm sure you heard growing up in your setting, like, well, that's a sinful choice.
Yes.
Like it's a lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to bless that any more than ask God to bless being a pedophile, something like that,
Yeah.
or alcoholic.
Right.
So very much that's how I grew up. Okay.
Yeah.
When I got to Southern California, I was already starting to deconstruct a bit. I think when the evangelicals all of a sudden started making abortion the big dividing line.
Yeah.
That was also during the Cold War and with Reagan as president and everything. And I started thinking, well, so what if you save all these unborn fetuses and then you nuke the world? Right. Right. And I felt like, well, so if you're so pro-life, how can you also be so pro-nuclear?
And remove all those lives, right?
Yeah. Right. And pro-capital punishment. I mean, things didn't line up. Okay.
Yeah.
Or these people are hungry and homeless, and that's too bad.
That was their choice.
Yeah. But if they were if they were still in utero, okay, then they're precious. And it's like, that's really inconsistent to me. So I was already starting to, in a general sense, wrestle with the whole package that I had so much embraced growing up, right?
Right.
And the seminary I went to, Fuller Seminary, a lot of Hawaii people go to Fuller. It's kind of middle of the road. It's not hard right. It's not hard left. But there was enough space and enough professors, enough classmates where you have these conversations where you can kind of have the freedom, the safety to take things apart and try to reconstruct them in ways that make sense of who you are now and how you see the world. But still, the gay thing, maybe the closest I was getting was compassionate conservative, as some say. So love the sinner, hate the sin. Okay, that sort of thing. Well, now it's 2007. And this, for some of your listeners, this is going to sound so mystical, okay? But it's actually the only way I know how to describe this, Nolan. I'm fast asleep. Normally, I don't even remember dreaming at night, okay? But this night, I was having this encounter with God. And God was saying, essentially, in an inaudible voice, okay, Ken, I'm going to explain why I've given you whatever reputation you have and whatever reputation you enjoy. It's to spend it down for the remainder of your life on a group of unnamed people that can only take away from your reputation, not build it up. And I remember thinking, well, okay, if this is going to cost me my reputation, God, I think you should name this group. And God's like, no, that's not relevant. And I'm like, yes, it is relevant. and I felt like if people are familiar with Jacob wrestling with the angel all night, that it was like, no, it's relevant. No, it's not. No, it's relevant. No, it's not. And I felt like God kept saying, again, not in an audible voice. No, the only thing that's relevant is if you really think this is God actually talking to you, or did you have a late night burrito? Right? This is just indigestion. And there had been several years before so this happened most of my life, one other time where I wasn't asleep. I was at a huge student conference of 20,000 students. That happens every 3 years. And I was there as a trustee, and I felt, I heard this voice. So this time it was a voice that said, next time in 3 years that there's this conference of 20,000 students, I'm going to put you on the stage. And I'm looking around like, okay, anybody else hear that? Nobody? Okay. And then why would that happen? I'm not a missionary. This is a missionary conference. I'm just a trustee. I'm a pastor of a modest church, why would that happen? And it's just like, okay, well, 3 years later, actually 4 because of Y2K, I was the main speaker for 20,000 people.
Wow.
Okay. So while I'm having this back and forth with God in 2007, I'm sensing in my spirit, this is exactly how I felt when God said God was going to put me on the stage the next conference. So I'm like, oh man. So I said, all right, I actually, because of that, I believe this is a real encounter. I can't explain it. I can't prove it, but I'm going to obey it. Okay. So I woke up the next morning. I told my wife, buckle your seatbelt. We're about to go down.
Yeah.
And she's like, what are you talking about? I said, I just promised God last night that I would be willing to spend down my reputation, use my position and privilege for a group of unnamed people that is being oppressed and marginalized. And I don't know who that is. I really didn't know who that was. Okay.
Yeah.
So 3 months goes by. I'm puzzling over this. And a friend from another church says, hey, you know, we're a bunch of Asian American Christians. We're concerned about social justice. And we think there should be a public debate on Asian American Christians and LGBTQ. And in those days, they said homosexuality. Okay.
Yeah, right.
And as soon as he said that, Nolan, I'm like, it's that group. Crap. It's like, are you serious? And this was still as a compassionate conservative, right?
Yeah.
And so I said, you know what? Not only will I offer our sanctuary as the host for that public debate, but I think I'm supposed to be part of it. So, you know, I was getting ready to be up on stage and, you know, put in the compassionate conservative stuff. But we ended up bringing back a former worship pastor from our church who's now openly gay. And he had done so many amazing things in that space until he came out. Right. And he hasn't been welcomed back since. So we got him to come, but I felt it after praying about it. I said, I'm not supposed to debate him. This is my room, quote unquote. I'm supposed to yield the floor and give him the space to tell his story without having me challenge it. Okay. So this is before the internet, but 800 people showed up for this thing. Right.
Wow.
It's just word of mouth. Okay. And the room was just filled with energy because people were like, you know, and I was feeling all this pressure because I'm the only somewhat conservative people on this stage. The other person was a very affirming therapist, okay, who's best friends with this gay guy. And I'm like, so the conservatives are going to be looking to me to actually say everything back to this guy. But I felt like I'm not supposed to. So I knew I was going to get it. And I did. Okay. Yeah. But I still felt like that was the right move. And so because of that, Prop 8 was in the news at the next year. And so there was a bunch of secular Asians in LA that were trying to get churches to vote against Prop 8. Well, that wasn't going very well. But they reached out to me and they said, well, you seem to be at least willing to meet with us. But, you know, Reverend Fong, we got to tell you, honestly, we think you're still a homophobe. And I'm like, I might be. Okay. I truly might be. I said, but what makes you say that? And they said, well, it's because you don't seem willing to accept all of our secular, at the time they were calling it gay agenda. And I said, well, in fairness to me, as a Christian, let alone a pastor, I don't accept any secular agenda carte blanche. Like there's something I bring to life. It's a certain lens, right? But time will tell. Okay. So we work together. Now I'm having gay Asian people, not even necessarily Christian, in my life that I'm come to know and care about. And 2 years later, they nominate me for an award. Okay. And I'm like, what? So this guy who was questioning me 2 years before, he goes, so I'm on this board of this historic gay organization in Long Beach. And every year in Chinatown, we have an awards ceremony. And we've given it to like George Takei and other, you know, notable gay people or gay allies. But I nominated you to this board and they don't know you. And they think it's insane to give one of these awards to a Baptist minister. And I go, I think it's insane. It's like, why would you nominate me? And get this, Nolan, he goes, because even though we thought you were a homophobe, and maybe you were 2 years ago, we now believe that you're one of our heroes.
Wow.
And I said, why would you say that? I mean, I'm touched, but why would you say that? And they said, because you treat us as full human beings. Okay. Now, you know, I've since told people, it's like, you get awards for that? You know, just for not being a jerk. Yeah. It's like, that's a really low bar.
That reminds me of that Chris Rock sketch where he's like, when they're like, I take care of my kids. What do you want, a cookie? You're supposed to take care of your kids. Like,
right. Exactly. Right. So why are you giving me a cookie?
Yeah.
So he says, look, whether or not you choose to show up to our awards banquet, and I found out the other person they were awarding was also a straight guy, but he was a huge gay ally. He was the state controller for California. He ran for governor and lost, John Chang. But they said, whether or not you choose to show up, we're still going to give you the award. I go, that's the weirdest invitation to an award ceremony I've ever received. I said, you know what? When the outcasts want to give you an award, you better show up.
Yeah.
Okay. So I show up, and this is the most gay, dominant, room I've ever been in my life at that time. There were Filipino drag queens who looked like they're in a beauty, pageant, right? And all this kind of stuff. But there were 2 tables of young adults from my church.
Oh, wow.
I didn't expect to have anybody there, right? And I go, what are you doing here? They said, well, the word's gotten around that you're going to get this award. And some of us are landing on different places about this issue. But we think that this is a group of people that Jesus loves. And so you're our pastor, and we want to show you that we support you showing up.
Wow.
Okay. Now, I'd given that guy, I said, I only have 2 conditions if I'm going to show up. And he goes, okay, what? I said, can I have 5 minutes with the mic? Because if I'm unlike anyone you've ever given an award to, I want to be able to say where I'm coming from. And he says, we always give the awardee 5 minutes with the mic, but handing a Baptist minister a mic at our banquet is making a lot of people super nervous.
Yeah.
But we told them, we've learned you can trust Reverend Fong with a mic. Because what's your second condition? I said, well, if you ever want to use my name and likeness in future publications or something, can you just check with me first? And they go, oh, we do that as a courtesy, all of our. Okay, I'll show up. So I get my 5 minutes with the mic. Okay, the whole room just shuts down. Right, Reverend Fong, Evergreen Baptist Church. And I just said, this is a really unusual night, isn't it? And I said, this is called the Pacific Bridge Builder Award. And I know a lot of people here from the LGBTQ community have been trying to build a bridge across a chasm that's been there for centuries to the faith community. And I think it's really slow going. And even if you finish the bridge, there's no guarantee that anyone from the faith side is ever going to use the bridge. I'm here to tell you that I feel called to build from the other side of the chasm. And some of the building materials I have to use are theology and scripture, right? And that kind of stuff. Because if I don't use those materials, no one on my side is even going to put their little toe on the bridge.
Right.
But understand this, we're building the same bridge. And I want to believe that if there is intention from both sides of the chasm to build the same bridge, not only will it be built sooner, quicker, but there's much more of a guarantee that people from both sides will be using the bridge. Then I got a standing ovation.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's kind of, I started this group at our church, some lay people who are huge gay advocates. They've been pressuring me. And finally I said, it's time. So we started with 5 gay people, quietly by the time I retired 7 years later, there were 75 to 100 AAPI, somewhere on the spectrum, gay or trans people coming to the church. And it's like that whole dream thing, it's like, I believe I heard God right. Now, I love sharing that story in shorter form with my very conservative friends, even if we have some conversation, because they're like, you're being disobedient. Like you're bringing, I'm like, actually, I'm being obedient.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah, right. So it's like, now, very subjective. You didn't have the dream. You didn't have the conversation. But I'm looking at the fruit. I'm seeing lost sheep come home. Okay. I'm seeing them add their gifts, their presence, who they are, their uniqueness to the fullness of the body of Christ. And they're actually saving us straight people from our biases and our blind spots. And so when I retired, I had to look for another church. And even though it wasn't gay, it's like, no, I can't go to a church that doesn't welcome this group of people that are now part of my life. So we found one.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, so the stance that changed for you was the acceptance of bringing them into the church, but you had mentioned that, you'd been born or raised to believe that, it was a sin. So you loved the sinner, but not the sin. Did your position as to how you perceived what they did as sin change, or was it still the same that I'm just loving harder the person, not not the sin.
That's very perceptive of you. Um, no, that really changed. And the best way I know to explain that is to take it out of sexuality and gender identity and put it back into race.
Okay.
Okay. So um, let's say Nolan, you're looking for a church, and you find this church, and I'm going to pick on the Howleys. So the pastor's a Howley, and he says, "Hey, Nolan, welcome to our church. I saw your certificate of baptism. I clearly see that you're my brother in Christ. Full disclosure, though, we believe that the Bible has always taught that God is Caucasian. God's a Howley. And before there was sin, before the fall, God created the human race as Howleys. And then because of sin and the fall, so we're not even blaming people, okay? It's not a choice, but anyone that's not a Howley is less than fully made in the image of God. So the fact that that's you, again, a little bit different. I'm not saying that you can choose not to be Chinese, okay?
Right.
But, I have sympathy for you because you probably wish you were Howley.
Yeah.
So we can never celebrate that you're not Howley. We can never actually perform your weddings. Okay. We can't put you in any position, Sunday school teacher, even usher, worship leader, that will look like we're saying you're on equal value, equal worth as a Howley. Okay. All of that being said, welcome to our church.
We'll take your money too.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing we'll take is your tithe.
Yeah.
When I shared that example, I said, today you're telling me with a straight face as a person of color that you would go to that church. Like, no, you wouldn't. Or if you did, you're just weird. Like you're just I said, well, that's what I've learned from my queer friends is when we say, oh yeah, okay, I'm not even gonna say you chose this. It's biological, but it makes you less than. Okay. So we can't celebrate you. We'll just tolerate you. And then blah, 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 blah. Right. I mean, all these kind of things. It's like, that doesn't line up with the God that I've come to understand and know, any more than, let's say, if someone shows up in a wheelchair that's paralyzed from the chest down. There's not those many folks in most of our able-bodied churches. Right. And it's because we don't accommodate them. There's no ramps. The bathrooms don't work right for them. But we didn't say you couldn't come.
Yeah.
But when people started coming who were less than physically fully able, all of a sudden the scales start falling from our eyes to go, we don't have any ramps. Like, oh, there's no grabber bars in the stalls. Right. Well, then trans people start showing up and they say, where can I go to the bathroom? And like, well, there's a boys' room and there's a girl. It's like, oh, there needs to be, right? It's those kind of things. So actually, I see people that we've marginalized who aren't in the majority in most of our churches. They're kind of like the good Samaritans, if you will, in that story, that they have every reason to keep walking when they see us on the side of the road. But out of their own woundedness, and some of the wounds are ones that we've caused, they actually can bring insight and healing. And that's why I said earlier, I need them now. I'm not just trying to be hospitable. I'm desperate for the good Samaritans to save me. Because the game is rigged for cis, het, straight people, especially males like me. And it's just like, I know what Jesus thinks about that.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, no, I tell people, are you a Christian? I go, I'm a recovering hypocrite. That's a good conversation starter.
Yeah. I'm sure it definitely gets them thinking a certain type of way.
Yeah.
And assuming things, right?
So did that help? Did it help kind of understand where I've changed, why I've changed?
Yeah. And I guess to clarify, so my confusion with this in general has always been, we hear a lot of the majority of the churches saying like, homosexuality is a sin. And then I go, well, okay, so how do we know that and stuff? And the few things that I've been pointed to, it's like, I don't, it doesn't seem so black and white to me.
Right.
And so I'm curious as to, seeing that you've gotten to kind of see more of a 360 view of it. Where does this, just like incessant you know, belief of that homosexuality, the LGBTQ community is just a bunch of evil, people, and what they're doing is sin, and spreading this evilness. Like, why is it such a strong, you know, issue for them?
Yeah.
Like, I gotta feel like there's an for the people up higher, there was an underlying something else that caused this desire to influence the masses in such a strong way. Am I off for thinking that, or
No,
being
I don't think
confused by
so.
that?
No, I would say one statistic that I learned in this journey that has really stuck with me is that Christian kids who identify somewhere in the LGBTQ trans spectrum, who are persecuted at home and/or at school or church, are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
No surprise. When I read that, I thought, okay, and this is early in my journey, Nolan. I'm thinking, okay, there's still a lot of big questions that I haven't figured out answers to yet. But I know the answer to that question is God wants those kids to stay alive.
Mm.
Okay. So if
Yeah.
I have been doing anything, saying anything that is contributing to those kids feeling like I'm better off dead and the world is better off if I'm dead, then I'm going to do everything in my power to give them a life affirming message. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that even though abortion is back in the news because of the Supreme Court's recent decision, for some years now, the evangelical church, especially the very conservative side of it, it's been same-sex marriage. It really hasn't been abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I think there is a human, even sinful tendency to make something a dividing line issue when you think, based on your experience, that issue is never going to touch you personally.
I see.
Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you growing up, I'm older than you. To have any divorced people in our church, oh my gosh, like no way, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
divorce is a sin. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, since that time, a lot more Christians have gotten divorces, pastors have gotten divorces, and even some remarried. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
so people are paying attention and they're like, well, I can't think that anymore. Now, there's still some that do, but a whole
Yeah.
bunch don't because it happened to them personally in their family circle to someone that they care about. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because gays were having to be closeted for so long, people didn't even know they knew or loved a gay person.
Yeah.
I mean, the running joke in church circles is your choir director's probably gay. Okay. you know, your organist probably gay,
Mm-hmm.
but they never feel safe to share that part of who they are. And
Yeah.
so you're just walled off and you just keep thinking your thoughts, not even knowing, right? Well, there has been a movement since Stonewall riots and all that kind of stuff where gays are saying, we're not going to keep silent anymore. You're not, Christian or not, we're here. This is a part of who we are. It's not everything who we are. And so that trickles into Christian families, and more Christian kids are coming out to their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A couple years ago, our own daughter came out as bi. Okay. And it's just like, okay, I'm not shocked. Okay. But there are still some parents that go, no, if we show any kind of compassion towards this child of ours,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to this, then it's going to encourage them to do it even more.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm like, your assumption is already off. Like I had this conversation with this mother of several children in our church, and one of the children, most people who know this kid think he's gay. Like he has all the outward mannerisms and interests of a gay person. And so I've had a few conversations with her. So I know she's wrestling with that. So now she's sitting hearing my sermons on this journey where I'm becoming more open and affirming. And so she says one day, so as an adult, I get where you're coming from, even theologically and scripturally. I'm not comfortable with it, but I get it. But, and then, she starts talking generically. But what if you're 13 and your sexuality is still fluid? Okay, so there's this. So if you're hearing that God's going to love you no matter what, in fact, maybe God made you exactly this way, well, then isn't that going to encourage that 13-year-old to flow into that thing? And that's going to be a lifetime of persecution and hardship when there's a better life if you just flow towards being, and my heart, I'm telling you, as a pastor, my heart felt that. I knew what she was struggling with as best I could, but the premise was false. That sexuality is fluid.
Yeah.
Right.
That's where the problem was.
Right. But I get it. Like in her mind, she's saying, yeah, I see all these mannerisms too.
Yeah.
But it's unacceptable. I can't create a safe and accepting, affirming space for this child of mine. And so I'm going to adopt a belief that says you can still flow and be straight.
Right.
Okay. And so part of it is, like anything, you have to kind of enter wherever people start.
Right. You can't just change them
but you can't necessarily leave them there either, right? So I feel like, I mean, to the root of your question, I feel like there is a general, maybe even consensus among conservative evangelicals in this country, and I think also in Hawaii, part of the country, where they feel like conservative Christianity is under attack. Okay. And you see, that's what the whole MAGA thing and all that kind of stuff. So that's why they embrace Trump, because even though he's a philanderer and adulterer and all this kind of stuff, he's this horrible narcissist. Yeah, but he's our bully. He's speaking up for us, the persecuted Christians, and one big symbol of that is the progress that gay people, LGBTQ people, have made in the last 20 years. Okay. So they're saying, oh, this is going to threaten, marriage. And I'm like, straight people are their own threat to their own marriages. It's like nobody gay is enticing someone in a healthy marriage to leave, but there's all this kind of mumbo jumbo. And I think it's part of a narrative right now that helps them define that us against them. And gay rights, trans rights, all that stuff is but representative of the attack on conservative traditional values. And I think that, this may not be the subject of your podcast, but I think that then gets to Christian nationalism, which is this myth that America is supposed to be a Christian country. Yeah. And so it's supposed to be, everyone's supposed to live by Christian principles. I go, okay, look, if we're in the Middle East, you're trying to bring democracy and you don't want a theocracy. You don't want the mullahs setting the law for, everybody else. But over here, it's okay. That's actually, you don't want democracy. You want a theocracy. You want Christians to run everything and everyone has to kowtow to the Christians. I'm like, I get why you want that, but that's not what America was ever supposed to be.
Yeah. And I think the hardest part is there are so many conservative Christians that have the right heart in believing that they think that they're doing the right thing by helping others change and like they're not trying to be mean or evil. They're just like, you are doing this wrong. I want you to go to heaven. So here I'm going to push this on you to change you so that you can go to heaven. But that just makes it so much harder for me to imagine how they can understand and accept this. And it's funny because when you read, stories of Jesus' teachings and his words, it's like, do you not see that you're kind of doing the opposite of what he was saying and doing? Like it seems like you're right in line with the church that he was fighting against. And like a lot of the similarities of what you're doing now is just like the ones that he was fighting against. And it's so confusing to me.
And that's why I say my biggest identifier today is I'm a recovering hypocrite.
Yeah.
It's like, I grew up with that. I speak fluent hypocrite. Okay. and if I'm only hanging around fellow hypocrites, it's like, we're all lost. I mean, I spent 20 years teaching a monthly Bible study to recovering Asian American drug addicts in the hood. Wow. And that's what actually began to really before I even took on the gay stuff, that's what began to really rewire the way I saw things. Because I used to walk into that room, every month it was mandatory. It's about 40 of them. It's a 2-year community program. They got to live there. And my first unguarded thought was, God must love me more than you because you guys are a bunch of losers.
Oh, wow.
Okay. I've never been drunk. I've never taken drugs. Obviously you guys don't have any teeth because you're smoking too much crystal, but I would never say that. But that was my spiritual conceit. Okay. Yeah. And so for months, I'm basically giving the same Bible lesson that I just gave in a sermon at my church. And a lot of these folks, especially the Koreans and the Black folks, they all grew up going to church. A lot of their dads are pastors. Okay. But they're just being polite, but I'm not making any connection.
Yeah.
Okay. And slowly, not all of them once, not like that dream in 2007. Slowly, God helped me understand that I was an addict too. Except my drug of choice was hubris, excessive self-congratulations. Okay. And then being an Asian, I get off doing comparative worth. What kind of car do you drive compared to my car? What school did you, right? And it's like, it just followed me right into seminary, right into church. Like we're doing it all the time. And it's just like, no, everyone has the same worth. It comes from God and God's love. And so it doesn't go up or it doesn't go down because you've messed up or people think bad thoughts about you, but neither does it go up because you're goody two shoes and you've done great things. Your worth is still the same. So as I started embracing that I was an addict needing to be in recovery just like them, it was like night and day. It's like the connection that we begin to make with each other. I remember one time I was teaching on Luke 15, which if your listeners are familiar, there's a lot of good parables in there. And one was the prodigal son. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, in this story, this guy has 2 sons and the younger one is ungrateful and he wants his inheritance early and he goes off to the equivalent of Vegas and squanders it. Right. And then comes home in shame. And his dad runs to the hill, gives him his robe, puts the rings on his fingers and has a huge Chinese banquet. Okay. and the older son who stayed home the whole time, dutifully working, which represents a lot of us straight people in church. He doesn't even want to go to the party. Okay. And his dad's like, we thought your little brother was dead. He's clearly alive. How can you not know how to celebrate? And the story ends without us ever knowing if the older brother ever went to the party. So that story was clearly directed at the Pharisees, at the religious hypocrites. Well, I give this story and this hand goes up in my little room full of dope fiends, as they like to call themselves. And someone very honestly says, so Reverend Fong, how many more times did that guy go prodigal before his dad didn't run to the top of the hill and throw him a party? Because everyone in this room will tell you, you don't do it just one time. Yeah. There's recidivism, right? And I'm like, no one in all my time in church, even growing up before I was a pastor, has ever asked that question. Yeah. Because we think, I guess we're the prodigal, right? It's just no, these people have actually dumpster dived, right? Yeah. They've actually lied to everybody that's ever, trusted them. And I had to take a moment. And I said, well, if I was the father in the story, I'm just being honest, maybe you get one more prodigal time. Yeah. But even you come back that second time, there ain't no party because that's going to bring shame on all of us. Okay. But I said the father in this story is nothing like me or any earthly father we have. It's the father who sacrificed his own son. Right. Yeah. So I think there's no limit. Okay. Now, when I go back and I share that story in the typical church setting, well, Reverend Fong, you're enabling bad behavior. Okay. And I know where that's coming from. And I said, but here's the secret meaning to that story. I said, the elder brother in that story was just as prodigal as his little brother. He just never left home and did it overtly. Yeah. And I said, because that's who the subject of this whole story was. Yeah. And I said, so here's a newsflash, folks. Long before sin was a moral problem, it was a theological problem. So God said to the first pair, if you want to go with that, okay, you have everything in the garden. It's all there, tree of life. Whatever you do, though, don't go to the other tree and eat that fruit. And they went and did it anyway. Now, eating fruit is not an immoral act.
Right.
That's what I have, like 8 servings of fruit every day. Okay. But what's worse is when we don't eat fruit.
Yeah.
What
That's the
this
sin.
so the sin was that they thought they knew better than God.
Hmm.
Okay, didn't God? Yeah, God did say that, but in this case, it doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to us.
Yeah.
So God says, don't judge other people. Well, I know God says that God's only, but in this case, I'm qualified to judge, right? And
Mm.
so I said, so you and I may look good on the surface. We haven't
Yeah.
overtly gone prodigal we haven't embezzled money. We haven't cheated on our spouse, right? All that stuff. But God's saying, yeah, but there's a deeper sin than that.
Hmm.
And that's why his criticism, you whitewashed tombs, you broods of vipers, right? On the outside, you look great, but inside you're rotten, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, what's rotten? What's rotten is we think we're almost like God.
Yeah.
So when people would come to me and they're like, oh, I just wouldn't be surprised if you judge me based on what I did. I go, actually, I have no room to judge you. I said, if anything, let's go to the cross together. I said, because whether I've done anything overt, God knows my condition. God knows my hubris addiction. And it's like, I relapse all the time. And so that actually makes me more humble. It makes me more teachable. And so I am completely unqualified to judge you, but I can go with you to the place of healing. Right. And so that to me is as core, as central as it can get.
I love that. I'm so grateful that you not only shared that, but that you spread that to the people that you have, because I think that the biggest problem that I've had, because it affected me, was that so many beliefs and decisions were based out of fear,
right,
versus going towards love. And the way you just described it is it's all centered around love and the positive, versus, oh, we can't do this, or we have to do this because if not, eternal damnation and judgment. And I think the majority of the voices that I heard growing up was out of judgment.
Oh, sure.
And it just prohibited you from doing things. And it kind of circles back to what you're saying about having the freedom on your podcast to share what you feel like. It's so much of a better life, right? Like that you're not being handcuffed by judgment. It's like, hey, I get to say what I want. It's like, wow. And look at how great things have been for not only you, but for the people that needed to hear what you have to say, or to hear the stories that you've been able to get from your guests. So I'm so grateful that you took the time to have this conversation with me about that, because when I read your bio, I was like, this is fascinating. I always wanted to have a conversation like this to better understand it.
Yeah.
And I never felt that I could in a safe space with someone, from the church that, I wouldn't necessarily know if, like, is this a say, like, am I going to get somebody who's going to be truthful and honest versus saying what I have to say or put on the veil, right?
Well, and I would also like to believe, Nolan, that what you heard from me is really based in the Bible. It's not, because people are like, you're not getting liberal, are you? Right? And I'm like, okay, first of all, let's go back to assumptions. Why are you assuming that being conservative is the best and safest place to occupy? Because the most conservative people in the New Testament are the ones that Jesus condemned.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was saying too.
So Jesus was incredibly liberal with God's love and I said, so there are people now that I know they don't say it to my face, but they must be calling me a heretic. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, I can't stop anyone from what they want to say, but my worth doesn't go up or down based on what people say. Right. So that there's this huge power and freedom there. I said, second of all, life is full of ironies. I would think if it, based on my understanding now of what a heretic is like, I think that shoe fits you pretty good. So one of my marching orders has come for years now that, Jesus was being criticized by the self-righteous religious people at his time for publicly hanging out with known sinners.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's just like, well, guess what? If your fear of your reputation being denigrated, it's like, well, then you're focusing on the wrong thing. In fact, I would say that these people so should openly gay Christian people be allowed to teach our children in Sunday school? And I would say, did you bother to talk to some of the straight Sunday school teachers, what they were doing the night before?
Right.
Right. And it's just like, you just give everybody a pass. And yet somehow your kids are still being, taught the right things, I would hope. But I said,
Yeah.
Here's what I want for my kid and for your kid, that whoever teaches them about Jesus actually has a real relationship that's grounded in this radical love. Like, it's not just doctrine. Without it, they're lost. And so, like, I would have these new gay people coming through that group to our church. And so, Pastor Ken, could I like usher? And I'm like, well, first of all, again, like Nolan said, we will accept your tithe. No questions. Okay. But I said, the fact that you would ask me if you could usher, I said, there are straight people that were begging to usher and they couldn't be bothered. Okay. And you're just asking for crumbs. You're just saying, I want to contribute. I want to give back. I'm so grateful. I said, well, in contrast, so many of us are so entitled. And so again, it's my point. Without you just showing up and being that honestly grateful for the crumbs, I don't see my entitlement. I don't see how full of crap I am, right? And congratulating myself far too often. So that's where I think that it's not saying, oh, do whatever you want. Like people say when gay people, so now your church is going to be let gay people do whatever they want. I said, well, first of all, before the gay people were here, it was never do whatever you want for the straight people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, that didn't mean people still didn't do things that I didn't think were in the best, choices, but they, I still love them and I walk with them. Okay. So I said, so how come all of a sudden you think it's going to be different for gay people? And I think for some gay Christians and even some pastors of affirming churches, they're saying, oh, so, for some gays, I want to be polyamorous. I want to just have open relationships. I go, I don't know how to fit that within a covenant relationship. So if you were straight and said, I wanted to be a swinger, I can understand where that comes from, but I can't find a way to bless that. That doesn't mean you can't come to church, but I think there's a better way to live. Okay. Yeah. And I think that part is just starting to happen now as, I think some of the straight allies were so sensitive to how hurt and how much we've hurt gay people and that whole community that we just don't want to say any kind of guidelines. And it's just like, no, there are people that are saying, don't just leave me to my own devices.
Right. They came for guidance, right?
Right. Yeah. I came for guidance. Yeah.
Wow. I know that there's so many other things that we could continue talking about. And I'm probably going to be calling you later. I'm like, okay, what about this? but I think I've definitely gained so much appreciation and I'm really encouraged by just hearing your philosophy and the way that you've taken all of these experiences and have been able to articulate it so well in the way that you have here. So thank you for that. But I don't want to leave this podcast without hearing what has been promised to me by you as a hilarious story of how you met your Kama'aina wife. Because for those listening, Ken is not from here, obviously. He grew up in California. But as you could hear from time to time, he sounds like he's local because his wife is from here. So what is the story and background behind you meeting your wife and what is so funny about this relationship?
So I'll tell you two examples. The first time I was going to go to Hawaii to meet my future in-laws. So that was when I met with that Dr. Wong. Okay.
Yes.
My wife very clearly, very carefully laid out the dress code. Okay. Okay. I didn't know there was a dress code. She says, okay, so you're not from Hawaii. I'm local. So I can't look like you're not a local. I mean, you can't look like you're not a local. So What does that mean? Your shirt can never match your shorts. Okay. No, if I ever wear a muumuu, it can't match your shirt. Like we can't look like we went to we can't look like we went to Hilo Hattie's. Okay.
Yeah, and bought the
okay. Already I wouldn't wear, socks with sandals. That's okay. But she goes, okay, slipper. Okay. No wearing new slipper. right? So it had to be kind of got curl right to it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it can't have all this garish aloha Hawaii stuff. It has to look like you got it from Longs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. Right. It's like, I don't have that slipper. So we have to kind of work on them to make them look that
Yeah.
way. Right. I mean, it was just hilarious that I'm like, look, I've never been to Hawaii. So why can't I go to the Kodak Hula show? Right.
Yeah.
And she's like, there's just no way we're going to we're going to go to Polynesian Cultural Center, right? I was like, I want to see the woman wearing the coconut bra, right? And it's like, come on, just one time, then I'll have it out of my system. So we were going back and forth, right? Now, I wouldn't be caught dead. Oh, and then she's like, okay, I know you like Aloha shirt, but you like the bright kind.
Yeah, yeah.
That's California. Yeah, it got to be rain spooner. It's
Yeah,
got to
yeah.
be reverse cloth. Very
Mhm.
muted, very subtle. I'm like, oh man, that's killing me. I like the loud.
Doesn't sound like a party at all. It sounds like-
No. Okay, so then we get married. This is the second story, and we went to Maui for our honeymoon, and already in our engagement, she said, "Well, how many times do you think we'll be able to go back to Hawaii once we get married?" I said, "Okay, honestly, when I was thinking I was going to be an orthodontist."
Yeah.
Going to Hawaii was an exotic vacation destination that maybe once every 10 years. And she says, well, I have to go every year because that's where I'm from. And that's where my family is. Right. And I
Mhm.
said, well, just understand that that's not how Hawaii feels to me.
Yeah.
Okay. And so
And you're not an orthodontist.
No, and I'm not an orthodontist. So then we're on our honeymoon. And about halfway through our honeymoon, she says, you can go home by yourself. I need to stay longer.
Mhm.
Right? Hawaii no ko'oi, mau no ko'oi. So I'm like, wait. I said, I'm a pretty open-minded person. I don't think I'm just making that up. But I have never imagined in my worst dreams that I would come home by myself from my honeymoon.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't care if I have to buy handcuffs. We didn't have plastic ones in those days, and handcuff you to me, but you're getting on that damn plane and you're coming home. And it's just like, wow, that was a moment because
Yeah.
she was surprised how much she missed Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now,
As
years
with
later,
most people, yeah.
right. Okay. Years later, after 18 years of marriage, we finally adopted our daughter, and she's the only grandchild on my wife's side of the family.
Oh, wow.
And so ever since then, we've
Yeah.
made at least one trip, if not more, to Hawaii. Okay.
That's
And
great.
yeah. So now my daughter, she has this sense that she's also got some Hawaii in her.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right. But then, okay, last thing. So it's funny. I had gone to this timeshare presentation in Pasadena that we had promised to go from the Marriott about Kauai timeshare. Right.
Mhm.
And so the guy goes, okay, I'm going to make my presentation. I said, okay, before you start talking, this is my package that you have to beat. I said, for the price of 3 plane tickets, we get to stay in a 3-story house with a view of the Enchanted Lakes. I have a low mileage Lexus, home cooked meals, laundry service, and free babysitting. Okay, you have to beat that. Right? That guy goes, there's no way. I go, okay,
Yeah.
give me the massage certificate
Yeah,
and I'm out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been, even though it was a point of tension when we were 1st
Mhm.
together, it has resolved itself in a very beautiful way. And unfortunately, the pandemic has really put a block on those frequent trips. But
Yeah.
my wife and my daughter, at least, are going to be going hopefully this fall if Hawaii is open. But my
Oh,
my
great.
in-laws are almost 90. They're like, do not come.
Oh.
You make us sick.
Yeah, yeah. Well, every person that I've known that has gotten on a plane has gotten COVID, so I think there's something to your in-laws paranoia there. But have you I know that it started out a little rough, but do you feel like that this is part of like kind
Oh,
of like
yeah.
your second home too?
Well,
Yeah.
I would say this, Nolan. The first moment I stepped out of the plane, I'm still at Honolulu Airport. I felt like I was home.
Wow,
It's
that's
like,
cool.
this is the weirdest feeling, but I see in the ads in my peripheral vision, there's Asian American people, right?
Mhm.
They're just playing regular people, right? They're in all kinds of different roles in the
Yeah,
airport
yeah.
and on the curb and throughout life as it keeps rolling. And it's like, as much as there are lots of Asian Americans in California,
Mhm.
especially the parts where I've grown up with and worked, there's nothing like the pervasiveness, almost the dominance of the Asian American influence that you find in Hawaii. And
Hmm.
so I always love that. That just feels like I can really breathe.
It's interesting that you say that because being a part of the Asian American podcaster group that we met on, and seeing that your podcast is geared towards Asian America. I always it felt like it's a little different of an experience. Like for us, it's like we don't need to say Asian American. We're just like, oh, we're us.
Yeah.
Whereas for those of you on the continental U.S., it's a very specific,
Yeah.
kind of thing. Um, since you've been doing your podcast for over 8 years, like, have you seen that there's been at least progression towards maybe normalizing the Asian experience in the continental U.S., where it's not as necessary to, spell out like this is for us, for Asian Americans and stuff, like how it is in Hawaii, or has it kind of been slow to make that change?
Well, I think the API hate that popped up, showed its ugly face during the worst parts of the pandemic and
Mm-hmm.
Kung flu and China virus, all that stuff. It showed to the horror of some of us on the continent, and even those of us living on either coast, where
Mm-hmm.
you could argue it ain't like being in Wyoming,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That there still is this layer, might be thinner, but still a layer of perpetual foreigner,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And um, I think rather than doing a lot of wishful thinking, wishing that it wasn't that way,
Yeah.
it's kind of like embracing the low bar. You get an award for just being a decent human being, not a jerk. Uh,
Yeah.
I would say, okay, well, let's start where things are,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and then let's show up. I think even with this pushback against critical race theory and all that stuff, it's like, no, America has a checkered history,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to people who aren't white and European, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're not going to continue to repeat that, which we are right now in different
Yeah.
places, sadly, tragically, then we got to call it what it is. And I think what might be different here on the mainland is that a lot more of us have platforms, a lot more of
Oh
us
yeah.
have found our voices,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not being as reticent, we're not being as complicit. And sometimes, if the systems don't let us speak in our full voice and call a spade, if you will, then sometimes we kind of shake the dust off our feet and move on. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to colorize your brochure. I'm not going to make your
Yeah.
web page look diverse because, uh, in actuality, the culture is still white nationalism. It's still
Mm.
white supremacy. It's still Howley as the ultimate standard of all things great and good and beautiful,
Yeah.
and if not divine. And it's just like, no, like I could play that game. I learned how to play it very well, but it's an incomplete game. And
Yeah.
you're poor, I'm all poor for it if we just stay enclaved. But I'm
Mm.
also not going to waste my voice, my energy, um, just speaking to people that are not in any condition to really want to listen.
Yeah. Well, I for one appreciate that you have taken this position, and you could have, ridden off into the sunset in your retirement, but instead, I feel like the work you're doing now with your influence and with the stories that you are sharing and through your podcast, I think is doing just as much work in our communities as you were, working in the church and being a pastor. So,
Well, thank you.
thank you so much
I
for
would
all you do.
almost thank you. I would almost suggest that it's even broader than it was before. I'm not confined by the walls of my local church or,
That's true.
in
Yeah.
my doctrinal statement or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm out there rubbing elbows with all kinds of different people.
Yeah.
And, even for those, I'd say most of my listeners are not Christian. That's just my guess. Um, but they're like yourself, they're getting a different experience with someone who is still a Christian, even though a progressive
Yeah.
one. And they're like, like I think about this all over again. I
Yeah.
mean, I think to this day in 8 years, um, one of my, if not the most popular episodes was with this huge atheist. who was a PhD in genetics at MIT. She's been on a Joe Rogan experience, so she started small with my
Okay.
show. And she just, but but she was all came all prepared to just battle me, right? And I
Hmm.
said, okay, just so you understand, I was a biology major in college. I believe in science. And she's like, what? Christians believe in
How
science? I
does this
go,
work?
okay, yeah. I go, yeah, but honestly, I used to believe in the young earth and all that stuff. But I changed my mind. What? Christians can change their mind, right? So at the end of that conversation, she said, people from my neck of the woods, we don't know like people like you exist.
Hmm.
And this is really thought provoking, right? And
Yeah.
and I'm like, I'll take that. I'll take thought provoking.
you you've had some interesting descriptions of you. You're thought provoking and you're relatively intelligent.
Yeah,
Like
and naive as
everyone's
all
found
hell.
so many creative ways to
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
just only partially say nice things about you.
That's right. It's okay. My
Well,
worth is still the same. My worth is
yeah,
still the
yeah,
same.
exactly. Oh, well, this has been so awesome. I was looking so forward to finally like having somewhat in person conversation with you, just from all the things that I learned from you, and I have to say that all the credit goes to you being such a wonderful person that I was not expecting you to respond to me when I reached out to you. The way I found out about you was through this group that I'm, I'll admit I'm not very active in this Asian American podcasters group, but your post had caught my eye, and I'm in this process of like I really want to take advantage of this platform that I've created with my podcast and really do something with it. And I looked at you and I was like, man, this is somebody that I look up to as far as what you've done, and I just wanted to glean some of your knowledge, and I reached out expecting to get no response or a yeah, good luck with that. And you've been just so great and so humble and kind and gracious with your knowledge and your time. And then for you to come on here and spend all this time with me, and it's just been really fantastic. And I'm so grateful that you've allowed me to be, a part of your world and to make this connection. I'd like to think that when you do make it back here with your family, that we could actually meet up in
Oh,
person,
that'd be
or
awesome.
if I make it out to the West Coast, that we can
We can go
meet up in
grind.
person. Yeah.